I'm Scott Miller, and this is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Recently, we did a video talking about the disparity of cost of living and especially the cost of housing and real estate across the country to help people understand where things were expensive, where they're cheap, and what the range really is, like how much it's going to vary from the lower cost to the higher cost. And of course, people always come in and always have and say, well, you know what I'd really like is some concrete numbers so that I know what houses cost, right? Not I'm trying to save money and here's where I'll go, or I don't mind saving or spending money and then I'll go somewhere else. They want to know real numbers, as obviously everyone knows they don't mean exact numbers, but with a pretty tight range as to what a house is going to cost. And this creates some significant problem because everyone has different ideas as to what that is, and the prices are not so obvious. So today we're going to talk about why we're just honestly not able to provide that information. In other markets, it may seem like you might be able to. And in like the United States or Canada, you could generally provide a reasonable number for some of these questions. But here in Nicaragua, I don't believe you can. And that's an important part of understanding the market is knowing what we can't do and to reset that expectation so that we know, rather than asking that question, asking the right questions that will help us get to the answers that we need. It's a low-cost market with a lot of opportunity, but the biggest challenge is that there's so little information about it. There's so little information from it, and so few people have taken the time to understand it. So we're going to talk about what average house prices could actually be like right after the bump. The question was a very simple one, right? We're going to ask, what is the average 3-bedroom, 2-bath house going to cost here in Nicaragua? And maybe not in Nicaragua, maybe in a particular city, whatever. It doesn't have to be across the whole country. The video we were talking about is one about disparity of costs across the country. So completely reasonable that we're going to break it down by region, because we were talking about how San Juan del Sur, for example, is expensive and Leon is inexpensive, and there's lots of range in between. So makes sense, but we couldn't give solid numbers as to exactly what things cost. But there's reasons for this, right? So why is that? What makes it hard? Let's start with the question about a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Now, this is just an example he threw out. I don't know that that's what he's looking for. I don't know if he's just saying like the most average house, give us that. But it's an important specific example because it highlights one of the problems we're going to have right from the beginning. The 3-bedroom, 2-bath example comes up a lot here in Nicaragua, and the reason that it's an important one is that this is specifically a house that is a type of house that is extremely popular in North America. If you live in US or Canada, probably even Mexico, you're going to find the 3-bed, 2-bath home to be kind of a middle ground across every region, right? When you have smaller than that, you tend to have starter homes. And when you have larger than that, you tend to have quite large homes. And that 3-2 configuration has a tendency to be kind of the sweet spot in North American culture. So we talk about it a lot. We think about it a lot. If you're just saying, I just want a normal house, right? A 3-bedroom, 2-bath lets you have a master. So often a couple will have a house and they have their own ensuite. And then you have a guest bedroom and then a 3rd bedroom that's kind of an emergency one that was intended for children, but sometimes you use them for them, sometimes you don't, and it often turns into an office or a hobby room or a crafting room or something like that. And growing up, I had exactly this. I had a 3-2. Even our farmhouse, which was built in the early 1900s, was exactly that. Now, been added on. It didn't start as that, but it was a 3-2 during the time that we had it. And when we built a new house, we had a 3-2 configuration as well. So this is exactly what I grew up with. And nearly everyone I knew, I would say the median house in America is very much a 3-2, and it represents a huge percentage of the market. When you're looking at the bell curve of house distribution, it's the big one. It's the one that you just expect to find. If you come to Nicaragua, what you're going to find is that the 3-2 essentially doesn't exist. Now, I understand that the person asking this was asking for an average house. He just threw it out there. But the example highlights how difficult this is, that the things we would be looking for, the things we'd be gauging, using as our point of reference from North America, not only are not common here, they almost don't exist. I'm not sure that I've ever encountered a 3-2 in all the time that I've been here in Nicaragua. Maybe I have, but it would be an extreme case. What we tend to have is 2-1 and 3-1 configurations, and then you will get another bathroom normally when you get up to 4 rooms or more. And just the distribution of rooms and bathrooms and different things just tend to be very different than in North America for lots of reasons. Plus, there tends to be very different outdoor space and so forth. So a number of problems come up when we want to price for people. There's 2 main problems. One is expectations of the people who are looking at the houses, and the other is a lack of information in the market. So let's start over here. When you're coming, which is basically what the 3-2 highlights, when you're coming from North America, people that I talk to every day, right? I talk to a lot of people looking to move into different countries. And one of the things that really stands out is that what people are bringing as an expectation that they're looking for is wildly different, one person from another. Many of the people that I speak to are looking at spending outrageous amounts of money, would never hesitate to buy something just unbelievably modern, custom built. Often will say, oh, I'll spend double what the house is worth. I don't care. All it matters is that I get what I want. And they don't care that the house is going to lose value, a lot of value, right? That's what they want. And cost is no object. And they want something typically super modern, and nothing resembling what Nicaraguans would build or have broadly on the market. The houses essentially end up being unique, and so there's nothing to compare them to anywhere in the country, more or less. They are completely their own entity. The other is that a lot of people are coming and they want really inexpensive housing. Well, Nicaragua is the cheapest country in the region. The housing market is incredibly depressed, so I really am focused on low-cost housing. What can we do? And they're really interested in rents that are $80 to $120, right? They're houses that start at $145. They're looking at from rentals, construction that may be between $16,000 and $32,000, or in really expensive areas, $45,000. Right, completely different animals. So one group is looking at $500,000 plus, and the other is looking at 50,000 minus. And there's very few people that I talk to that are in the middle. So we have an inverse bell curve that I'm experiencing. And so to say, in America, if you were coming to the United States and you said, what is the average house price? We'd say, okay, let's start with what's an average house. It's like a 3-2, maybe 2,000 square feet, right? People go, maybe that's not average, but good enough. Okay, let's go with that. And you'd say, okay, that's under the bell curve. It's about in the middle. And then you'd say, okay, across America, obviously I can't give you an average, but let's say New York City, in a suburb that you'd like, right? Not in a terrible neighborhood. Okay, good enough. We'll eliminate those. Not in like Westchester, right? Not White Plains. Okay, we'll eliminate the super rich. But in that middle, right, what are we going to get? And we still know there's going to be a range. We're all understanding that, right? But it's going to be a meaningful range. So that's going to be between $300,000 and $800,000. I know it's a big range, but that's you understand what that range means. And you say, okay, take that same thing and move it to California. Okay, it's going to be between $500,000 and $1.2 million for the same house. Slightly different style because it's California. Okay, we gotcha. What about, Iowa, Nebraska, that kind of Dallas, right? And we can throw those numbers around and come up with meaningful things pretty quickly that we're able to express what a house will be like, what the neighborhood will be like, and so forth. And you have large market comparable options to compare against, right? It's a really reasonable way to talk about things, and people understand that rich houses represent this tailing off. Well, yeah, it's going to be much bigger, super fancy. We're not expecting these to be all made out of, marble floors or anything. No, of course not, right? We're just carpeted or hardwood floors, normal windows, central air, nothing weird, right? We got you, right? Maybe a ranch, maybe a colonial, maybe a cape, we know what the options, the range really is. When you come to Nicaragua, because the curve is an inverse, if we said that, you'd say, okay, so that's the average. How many of those can I go look at? I say, well, none. The average house doesn't exist in Nicaragua. Or if it does, there's just one or two. But because there's only one or two, it would be an outlier and it could cost anything, right? Because it's the only one. You want that? Well, you may have to pay a premium, or maybe no one wants it and you can get it for cheap. And maybe that same house could be expensive or cheap day to day, depending on who's looking at it, right? So an absolutely different animal because we don't have that traditional bell curve making it all make sense. There's just no way to have that kind of reasonable middle ground. So if I said, okay, the average is, and this might be true, $60 to $80,000. If I said that, the expectation would then be, okay, I can go cheap and get 60, maybe a little bit lower. I can go expensive, get 80, maybe a little bit higher. And then when you get here and go, I can't buy anything in the range that you said is average. All I can get is the stuff that's way cheaper. I like that it's way cheaper, but in no way does it meet the expectations I have of a building. Or all I can get is much more expensive, and it's completely fancy and way beyond what I'm imagining. Why is it like this? And the problem is when you're dealing with mean and median averages, they only make sense in a discussion way when we're dealing with a traditional bell curve or something really close to it. When we have something that's inverted to it, they are insane to talk about. But you have to understand that there isn't that bell curve to make those things make sense. So nobody cares what the median house is, and nobody cares what the mean value of a house is. Now we can break down and say, okay, we're going to get super specific. Right. And now we all understand, of course, that regions matter. No one's expecting there to be a single price across the whole country. That's not true. Quite a few people seem to think that. And it's not the disparity level that you might imagine in some places because it's not a huge country, but some people really think it's just like one price. What if I come to Nicaragua, what does this house cost? Like that house, you'd be lucky if it even exists to come up with the price of it. Nobody could do that. Some people might lie to you and pretend they know, but nobody actually knows. That's just not the case. So it's a very important thing to understand when we're approaching it. Now, we can break down and say there are types of houses that exist throughout the country, and there are some very standard ones. They tend to be the most inexpensive that are regular construction. These are built under designs by the government. They are in certain types of development. They recur throughout the country in very similar patterns, and those we can give good information about. And it's very useful for certain types of comparisons. However, very few as a percentage of expats are interested in living in those, neither those buildings nor those communities. However, I do have a number of people in my channel that regularly say I'm really interested in those because my channel is showing things that other people are not. So of all the people who are looking, there is a group in my channel who are very interested in those. And I think that they make some very nice houses, and we've shown quite a lot of them because it's where a lot of my friends live. It's where I spend a lot of time hanging out. They're just very normal houses for the slice of society that we tend to spend a lot of time with somewhat naturally. And so those we can start giving these numbers on, and we do on a regular basis, and they vary relatively small amounts throughout the country. So if anyone's looking for that information, we have it and we've given it, and I can give it again. But just asking what this person was looking for is not available. I can't tell him what he could find for what he's looking for. I can tell him what's on the market in these couple of unique circumstances that have very predictable pricing, and he can use that to gauge disparity, for example. But even that doesn't give you a lot of information about disparity because they're nearly price-controlled structures. The cost to get one in San Juan del Sur versus Leon will vary by as much as maybe 30%, but that's about it. The disparity for other types of houses, though, if you were going for a more fancy house, might vary by more like 200%. And so, which is still not a crazy number, but that variance would be very different than the ones we can give really serious comparables on. And so the utility of telling someone those comparables may actually work against us. If I was to give that information, it may lead to more confusion rather than less. So while I could do it, I could give averages, I could give these comparables, I could give this more concrete pricing disparity, I would only be doing so to placate people asking the question, but not for their own good. I would be misleading them or allowing them to mislead themselves by just telling them what they want to hear rather than explaining reality. So on one side, defining what people have as an expectation of the houses that they're looking for is super hard. And how should we approach this? And I'm not saying that the idea that this and thousands of other people have come forward with of, well, I'd like to know what an average house cost or something similar is bad. Of course not. That's a logical way to approach things coming from North America and much of the world, in fact. But here in Nicaragua, it just doesn't play out. And it shows, I think, people who are really interested in trying to figure out details of pricing before coming to the country. And that's one of the problems. And we say this about all places, but Nicaragua, it's definitely extreme, that you need to come here first. You can't be like, we can tell you some really simple basics. Nowhere is going to be cheaper in the region, but that's about how far it goes. We can compare to other places in the region, but we can't give you specifics. It's not that we don't want to, and it's not that some crooks won't do so to trick you, but it can't be done in a meaningful way. It cannot be. It just can't. So the first thing that would be required to really understand this is, one, to kind of define what you're looking for. Are you looking for bargain places and you're willing to make big sacrifices as to what your standards are, which may not be quality standards, it may just be customary standards, right? Well, I'm used to having hot water plumb throughout the building. I'm used to central air. I'm used to, having everything sealed so I can air condition rather than having things be open and colonial style, right? So that's one thing, is defining that kind of expectation. And then the second is, what exact size and what price range and what quality, right? Or do you want something really fancy? This is just, or do you not want to compromise, right? Just define what you want kind of as a starting point. And then understand what is available. And that is, I try to do my best on the channel. When we have time to see neighborhoods, when my foot is feeling good, I go out and walk neighborhoods. That gives you a little bit of an idea. I understand it's very little, but you can see the facades, at least, of houses. You can see how neighborhoods are laid out, and this gives you something to work with. And you can combine that with satellite views of where I'm walking. You can measure those houses. My father does. He will go into it, he'll look at a place and be like, oh, that house is interesting. And he'll go on Google Maps, find it on maps, measure it, figure out what its square footage is. He can see from my shot, is it 1 story, 2 stories? There's no basements. You don't have to worry about that. You can get a lot of information from that. But then anytime that I can, I get tours of houses and go around them and show them. I show them in all kinds of different neighborhoods and residencials and residencias and different parts of the city, right? So you do have that opportunity. So look at those videos. I realize they're few and far between, that we don't get invited into a ton of houses. Even people who are selling houses are very hesitant to allow any of their information to get out. They don't want to tell anyone about it. They don't want to advertise it, which makes you basically come to the conclusion they're not actually trying to rent it or sell it, but it is what it is. So we try to get that information out so you can see examples and what they're asking for them. And this is about the most concrete thing that there exists in the world, because I'm showing what people are actually quoting rather than most of the sites that give this information are real estate sites. So they're marking it up to show you an inflated price so that there's wiggle room to bring it down and room for them to make profit. I'm not making any profit. I'm not selling any houses. I'm not renting any, right? I'm not involved. I just get to get tours. So I have zero reason to be padding it, and I'm not part of any negotiations. Now, the people showing it are going to give a false price, and you can negotiate that, of course, but we all know that, right? We are upfront about that. So that is, I am doing as much as can be done, and there's no one having this information, right? No one has more information on any channel. If I could find it, I would love to know it too, right? But it's not out there. So if someone knows, let me know. So the thing that people are asking for is something nobody is or can provide. Now, in theory, I could get invited into a lot more houses, maybe, and I would love to, right? If anyone's out there and knows of a house that someone wants to show, and every so often someone writes to me and we try to show them, but it's hard to coordinate. Often they want us to travel places and stuff, and that's difficult to just go to see a house, but we do try to do so whenever possible. And some of you, when you rent places, invite us out and we try to go do that. So we're doing what we can. And so from just my own personal, when people are like, why don't you do more? I'm doing more than anyone, right? So it's because this is hard. Why aren't other people doing more, right? Because it's very, very hard. And the real estate people only do what they do because they make money on it, presumably. And so that information is misleading. So I don't know anyone who's providing this information in an honest way except for this channel. It's just not easy or lucrative. So so understanding that. So you need to really be able to start understanding prices. You have to come and see those houses and walk through neighborhoods and say, okay, so this neighborhood, these are the houses that are available. Go see some on the inside and be like, okay, now I'm starting to understand, because they're not like American houses. They're not like Canadian houses, not like Mexican houses. And there's a variety. There's lots of different styles. I'm at a point now where I rarely go into a house and I'm really shocked by what I'm going to find. Mostly it's like, it's like some combination of things that I've seen before. But that takes time to build up. If you are new to the market, every house is going to be like, whoa, never imagined someone building a house like this. We have different lot dimensions. We have different airflow needs. We have different lifestyle usages. There's so many things that are different, including maids' quarters being a separate building, being such a common thing, and in North America, unheard of, right? So there's all these factors. So coming down and learning what the houses are actually like is super important, because until you do that, yes, you can watch my show and I do my best to walk around those houses. I don't know how much that's really able to convey the feeling of being in the house. It certainly helps. It gives you a starting point. But coming down into like trying to get more concrete information before you come down and actually experience them firsthand, I think is fruitless, right? You need to understand what the houses are like. And then when you watch my show, what you see will be much more informational. And then you can look on a map and understand a bit more of what you're seeing and build more on it for the future. But as a starting point, that is very, very important. And so that's just, it's a requirement. Right. And it's one of the reasons we say more than even most places, but all places, never get deep into looking at real estate. Never start looking at concrete numbers before you go to a place. None of it makes sense to you. It's easy to get misled. You could end up with the more you study, the less you know about the market. Like bad things can happen. And it can encourage you to make bad decisions, like trying to decide on things before you've visited. And a lot of people feel compelled to do this. We talk all the time. I know that salespeople push for this, and it creates a culture of this, and it's exciting, and you get worked up, and you're like, I want to move, and you think that the thing you can do to action your forward movement is buying a house, and it's about the worst thing you can do ahead of time. And so I encourage you heavily to just relax and not try to do dramatic amounts of research. Yes, the kind of stuff that I like to show here or try to show here, where we're walking neighborhoods, showing different cities and showing houses when we can, I think is because we're not trying to sell anything, there's a certain amount of positive value to that. And so that's something you can do. But worrying really about, I need to know these really detailed things, they're not going to help you, right? If I gave you that detail, it would just lead you astray. It would not be beneficial. So that's one of these really big things, is understanding yourself and getting that impression of what's available. And different areas have very different houses. What's available in Leon is very different than what's available in Managua, which is very different than what's available in Matagalpa. The different and far afield will get even more different. There's different construction companies and construction techniques and materials available. And in many cases, Managua needs to be built with a consideration for the liquefiable soil. Leon has to be colonial construction. We have to work within those constraints. Matagalpa has to worry about hillsides and mudslides and heavy rain, but is very modern. There's just all these different considerations. And in places like the U.S., of course, they exist, but they exist generally over a larger geographic area for those disparities. And in Nicaragua, it's over a very small area. And so this throws people a lot as well. And so visiting those things or watching the show and seeing what the different cities look like should help to some degree. But being there firsthand is very important. So that's on one side. On the other side, across the country, there is disparity across the region, and Nicaragua has no comps. And so because of the lack of comps, because there aren't houses that are similar to each other. On one side, it's understanding what there is, and on the other side is understanding or finding out that Nicaragua doesn't have these repeating houses. We don't have the same, with the exception that we talked about. If you go into the barrios, you go into El Centro, even here in Leon. In El Centro, should go without saying, these classic, historic colonial buildings, 300, 400 years old, with beautiful construction and often large lots and really great accessibility into the middle of everything in the city. And you can just walk to all the restaurants and to the cathedral and to all the sites and just traffic going by, and you're in the midst of everything. Those are going to be much more expensive than something in the barrio where, yes, you can get to downtown, but it's 15-minute walk, 20-minute walk, and you're not in an area where there's cool restaurants. No tourist wants to see your house, and maybe it's not an old building, it's a colonial style, but it might be 100 years old, but not an antique, right? By that measure. Or maybe you go farther out in the barrios where like you're basically disconnected from the center unless someone comes to pick you up or you get a taxi, and you're not even colonial anymore because you're far enough out and you're just in a regular neighborhood that no one even passes through, and seeing a foreigner would be completely surprising. And each of these have completely different tiers of pricing, and the house styles change to some degree, and learning all those things, the difference in price could be dramatic. What might be $150 or even $200,000 in the center might be $15,000 to $30,000 in the barrio. A very comparable house by square footage, beds and bath, and even construction. The location is so significant, and one side of one block to the other, or just one street away, could be really significant as well. Much of the cities here in Nicaragua, every little tiny move is so different than the place next to it that even comparing houses block to block that are essentially the same cannot be done. And then again, when you're in the city or the beach, right, they're nothing like each other, including construction and house styles and pricing and everything. And so every beach has its own pricing. Every city has its own pricing. Every neighborhood, every block, every building, every view. So the disparity is so high from building to building. And even where you have things that are roughly comparable, the ability to compare them is often determined by whether they have sold in the last 100 or 200 years. Is the person who's looking to sell them looking to actually move, or are they just interested in finding out what they can get? In some cases, people are very adamant about not selling, and they'll raise the prices quite significantly. So this creates a problem of relatively unpredictable disparity that goes on around the country, and people are often not prepared for that, and there's no way to accommodate for it other than going out looking at houses and then attempting to purchase one. And this is something that really throws North Americans off as well. If we had really solid comps on a house and we said, well, okay, you got 10 houses in this neighborhood that have sold in the last 6 months, and all of them that are the same, these are all 5-bedroom, 3-bath from the same builder, built within 5 years of each other. And these, they're in different streets of a development. And all of these have sold between $400,000 and $430,000. And then you go look at another one and they say, we want $800,000. And you say, what? No. You say, here's all the comps. And you have your real estate agent go and talk to their real estate agent, and they'll have a conversation, and they'll be like, okay, maybe there's something fancy about yours. You added a pool. It's made with some nicer materials. You're including some cool appointments. Maybe you can argue up to 450, or in a wild world up to 500. But that's about it. And anything else, there's no one is going to touch it. Like, it's just too much different. And the real estate agent, the seller's agent, will come back to the owners and be like, you people are crazy. I'm not even going to work with you unless you come down to 500 as a starting point, and we're going to have to sell it below that. Like, let's just be reasonable, right? Okay, we'll hold out for 480, but it's going to be on the market for forever. Do you understand this? And the market could go down. You could be looking at holding this for 20 years, right? So they have this way to explain and push for value. And it almost always works. You can pretty much guarantee if you have $450,000, you're going to go into that neighborhood, and with a little bit of waiting, you will get a house. Doing that in Nicaragua will not work. You can't look at the prices of other houses. First of all, you can't see them. It's basically secret. And then to find out that even if you did magically have all these comparables, taking that to the person selling a different house, and they would say, I don't care about any of that because it doesn't matter. I'm the only house that's for sale. I'm the only house in my location. I'm the only house. They are all unique enough once you're in like real houses that they're going to be like, none of that matters. I'm asking 800. That take it or leave it, and that basically works that way. And there's just no way to come back and say, but there's a market that says it's this price. They'll be like, no, there isn't, and there really isn't. And so to find out what a house is worth, yeah, you can do a whole bunch of research. You can do a whole bunch, and this is what we do, right? I do real estate as an investor here in Nicaragua, and we spend tons of time looking at houses, trying to understand the prices. Looking at every bit of movement that we can to have a good feeling for value. And we talk to a lot of locals and get their opinions on things all the time, so we have a certain gauge. But when we then go look at an individual house, then we find out, are they asking something that we feel is reasonable? And they may say, we want 400,000, and we say, we'll give you 200,000. And sometimes they're like, haha, yeah, I know, great, I'll take 200,000. And sometimes they'll be like, what? I was being nice to give you 400,000. And we're like, whatever, that doesn't make any sense. And I'll give a quick story. There's a field across the street from a place that I used to film quite a bit. It's an empty field and it's pretty much worthless. No one has looked at it, had any interest in it whatsoever in all the years that I've been here in Nicaragua. When at one point I knew the field a little bit, somebody told the people who own the field, hey, you should come talk to me because I'm someone who buys property. Okay, reasonable. So they came to talk to me. Now, I had a fair idea of the value of the field. I've purchased other property nearby and know that its value is probably in about the $4,000 range. It's not a really big piece of property and it's got nothing on it. It's basically just weeds and some trees in an okay location that's nothing special with a lot of mosquitoes. Could you argue that it's worth 10,000? Yes. Could I argue that it's only worth 3? Yes. There's probably a happy medium. Okay, and it depends on the size of the lot. But I have a decent idea of what better properties that are bigger and nicer and better location and better deed and all that stuff are selling for and have sold for. So I know what the absolute maximum could be for this property. And I know what ones nearby, like really close, have sold for. And I know, how this compares to those as a quality of lot. These people, instead of coming to me and saying we want 5,000 or 10,000 or even saying 20,000 and hoping I would negotiate them down to something reasonable, came in and asking for something like 300,000. Right now, they had no idea what it was worth. They thought I was a complete idiot, and they were completely unwilling to negotiate. Of course, once they said 300,000, I banned them from my property and made them leave. But because that at some point is just insulting. Like, at least come up with plausible prices. Why would you bother traveling to insult me with a price? I have no idea. But to this day, they've never sold that property, and they don't get to talk to me. So that is the story of that. But it shows how much someone may be throwing the price off because they want or feel they're entitled to something that's not based on the comps around them. Now, of course, we understand the concept of gringo pricing and the idea of having a Hail Mary that they don't want the amount of money that they know it's actually worth, and they're hoping someone will fall for their trick of spending a lot of money. And you would be amazed at the percentage of gringos who come down and really do take an attitude of, well, I don't care what the market value is. And they don't care that there's no way to move things on the market and people will drop huge amounts of money for something that is worth a fraction of what they've put into it. And then they're stuck with it. In some cases, they're like, well, it's the place I wanted, so I got what I wanted, and that I paid double and I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I pretend that didn't happen. And a lot of people say that. And a lot of others are like really upset because they're now trapped with a property they can't afford to sell. And if they sold it ever, they're likely going to lose huge amounts of money, $250,000, which is a lot to take a bath on in a country where the average property probably wasn't worth anywhere near that amount in the first place. Losing $500,000 on a $150,000 property feels really crappy. And so people tend to just hold on to it and be sad because they have some mythical hope that somehow by holding on to it and losing that money longer, it'll get better, which doesn't really happen. So with all of this, there's no way for me to give these average numbers, but I hope this explains why we can't give average numbers, why I would be not doing anyone a favor by pretending that I could and giving some average with the inverse bell, and just, you have to come and look and you have to learn, and then you have to approach each property as a unique entity with its own advantages and disadvantages and value and problems, and know what you're willing to spend and what you're capable of spending, and just be willing to move on to another property. And that may be a really key piece. In the United States, you tend to find a house that you want and stick with it and just negotiate until you get it at a price you can handle, but assuming it's a house that's reasonable for you. But here in Nicaragua, you could find a house that is listed for sale, really be passionate about it, fall in love with it, go and talk to them, and then find out that you have a very misconceived idea of what it should cost or is going to cost. And then if you were to try to focus on that property, you would either spend way too much or go through a long phase and never get anything for it. You really have to engage on a house by house basis to be able to have an idea of property. And this includes for rentals. Now, rental markets are much more predictable because someone is not giving up some family heirloom and feeling all attached to it. They just want to get some money. So if you're just renting, the wild pricing effect mostly is mitigated. And so that you can have to some degree comparables. You still have most of these challenges, but they're not nearly as dramatic. But if you're going to buy, it gets absolutely crazy. And there is no simple answer. And that is why people are not just flocking to Nicaragua and buying houses willy-nilly. It is a difficult housing market for those who are not here and putting in the time to get to know it. And not that those of you who are having these challenges don't want to do those things. It's that you want to get that information before having done so. We all do. That would the only logical thing, right? But you can't. That's the real challenge, is that there isn't a shortcut to this challenge. You have to actually do the footwork yourself, understand the market, and then individually approach each house. And that's it. There is no working around that other than hiring someone you really trust, who's really smart, to put in the unbelievable amount of time to do that on your behalf. And so until that changes, or until a large number of people are willing to do that, it makes the market very, very slow. That is just how it's going to be. It is not the United States. We cannot replicate what the United States does here. We wouldn't want to in most cases. Most likely, it's a different place. A lot of those processes would not work out great here. So accepting that and just not bringing that North American mentality will protect you. The more you bring the North American mentality, and I know why we all do, it's baggage we have, and it's not that we're trying to push North American ideas on Central America. It's the context we have, and it doesn't always occur to us that these types of interactions may be things that are wildly different than our experience. But in this case, they really are, and that is why we don't give averages on house prices. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at the link, buymeacoffee.com/Scott Al Miller. I really appreciate it. We don't get paid, like we don't sell real estate or anything like that on this channel. Our only income is from the ads that roll here, which is such a tiny income, and the coffees, and anyone who hits that join button right down there to join the channel. That's where everything comes from. I would love it if you guys send in video questions, all the information you need for video questions, contacting me, anything like that. It's in the show notes. You can also go down to the comments and say hello, leave your comments, ask your questions there in text. That's almost as good as a video. Not quite. The video is so much better. And you can help support the show as well by telling a friend about the show, getting someone else hooked on it, and of course, letting another show run after this. Watch another one of mine, hit that like button. That does a lot for the algorithm. So I appreciate it a lot. Thanks for joining me. I will see all of you tomorrow.